Standing on the bitumen at the edge of the Bruce Highway near Bowen, Queensland, or along the quiet dirt lanes outside Broken Hill, there is nothing in the frame to catch the eye. You see standard Australian infrastructure, galvanised steel guardrails, low wire fences, a row of grey ironbark trees holding up dust, and a single road train shifting down gears as it meets the gradient. It looks entirely ordinary, static, and settled. Then you check the state tender boards and the deep geological survey sheets. Beneath that sun-baked clay sits a continuous engineering effort so large that its budget surpasses the original construction cost of the Snowy Mountains scheme, adjusted for inflation. What is remarkable is not that these mega projects exist, but that they have developed in plain sight without attracting wider national attention. For years, state agencies, local councils, and international consortia have quietly broken ground on massive infrastructural overhauls, from direct lithium extraction plants drawing from Permian-age brine to deep underground quantum hubs and heavy industrial energy transitions, without the average motorist ever noticing the shift beneath their tires. How did the largest, most expensive public works transformation in the history of Australian state infrastructure take place so silently? And what does it reveal about the true shape of the continent's economic map? Under Format B, this 5-part survey examines the single largest active mega-project across all 6 Australian states and 2 mainland territories, counting down from number 8 to the most significant site on the continent. Before reaching the deep industrial shifts occurring in Western Australia and Queensland at the end of our list, we must first look at how public perception of these landscapes was formed. For over a century, the standard view of Australian regional geography was built on a simple assumption: that the major public works of the nation were essentially finished during the post-war reconstruction era. The great dams had been poured, the interstate highway grids locked in, and the main rail corridors laid down. That assumption was entirely reasonable for its era, based on decades of stable land use and published state planning maps. But the first crack in that belief appeared when global supply chains, artificial intelligence processing demands, and critical mineral strategies converged on regional infrastructure all at once, forcing states to rebuild their foundations from the ground up. Item 8. Northern Territory, the Sun Cable Australia-Asia Power Link. We begin our survey in the Northern Territory, deep in the Barkly region south of Elliot. To a passerby, the Powell Creek Pastoral Station appears as a vast expanse of arid Mitchell grass and stunted acacia. Yet beneath this remote landscape lies the footprint of the largest renewable energy infrastructure project ever proposed on Earth, the Sun Cable Australia-Asia Power Link. Location: Powell Creek Station, Barkly Region, Northern Territory. Capital expenditure: $35 billion Australian dollars. Footprint: 12,000 hectares of solar array, 4,300 kilometres of undersea cable. Key entities: Sun Cable, Northern Territory Government, Infrastructure Australia. The scale of the Powell Creek array is difficult to register from ground level. Covering roughly 120 square kilometres of continuous solar photovoltaic panels, the site is paired with a 36 to 42 gigawatt-hour battery storage facility designed to provide continuous baseload power. The engineering challenge, however, is not merely generating power in the desert, it is moving it. High-voltage direct current (HVDC) overhead transmission lines will carry up to 6 gigawatts of electricity 800 kilometres north along the Adelaide to Darwin rail corridor to a converter station near Murrumbidgee, north of Darwin. From there, a 4,300-kilometre high-voltage undersea cable route will traverse the deep maritime trenches of the Indonesian archipelago to deliver up to 1.75 gigawatts of continuous clean energy straight to Singapore. For decades, geographic isolation was viewed as the Northern Territory's primary economic limit. Sun Cable turns that geographic reality on its head by utilizing the region's extreme solar irradiance to supply offshore industrial hubs. Approved by the Commonwealth Environment Minister in mid-2024 and with primary land use agreements secured with traditional owners, the project represents a complete spatial redefinition of the Australian outback, from an isolated interior to an international energy exporter. Item 7. Australian Capital Territory, the Light Rail Stage 2B Extension and Lake Burley-Griffin Crossing. Moving south to the nation's capital, the Australian Capital Territory presents an entirely different structural challenge, integrating a heavy mass transit corridor directly through a heritage-listed urban landscape planned by Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin. Location: Canberra Central to Woden Corridor, ACT. Capital expenditure: $3.0 billion Australian dollars, estimated combined stages. Footprint: 11 kilometres of dual-track light rail, including a new bridge span. Key entities: ACT Government, Major Projects Canberra, National Capital Authority. For over 50 years, the master plan of Canberra relied on a decentralised bus network radiating outward from Parliament House. That model broke down as urban density increased along the north-south axis. Stage 2B of the Canberra Light Rail project extends the existing line from Commonwealth Park across Lake Burley-Griffin through the parliamentary zone and down to Woden. The core engineering puzzle lies in crossing Lake Burley-Griffin at Commonwealth Avenue without altering the protected vista between Parliament House and Mount Ainslie. Engineers must construct wire-free track sections through the parliamentary zone, relying on onboard energy storage systems to eliminate overhead catenary lines that would visually disrupt the national capital's central axis. Furthermore, deep piling work into the lacustrine sediments of Lake Burley-Griffin requires strict environmental mitigation to avoid disturbing historical catchment deposits. By cutting through the heart of the national capital's federal precinct, this build transforms Canberra's foundational layout from a car-centric garden city into a modern, transit-oriented urban corridor. Continuing down through the jurisdictions, the nature of these industrial developments shifts from municipal transit to deep geological extraction, where modern engineering intersects with ancient Earth history. Item 6. Tasmania, the Marinus Link Undersea Interconnector. Crossing the Bass Strait to Tasmania, the state's energy infrastructure relies on a submerged continental shelf that was once a dry land bridge connecting Tasmania to the Australian mainland. Location: Heybridge, Tasmania to Waratah Bay, Victoria, via Bass Strait. Capital expenditure: 3.1 billion Australian dollars, Phase 1. Footprint: 345 kilometres of high-voltage direct current cable, 255 kilometres undersea. Key entities: Marinus Link Pty Limited, Tas Networks, Commonwealth Government, VicGrid. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels were up to 120 metres lower than today. The Bass Strait was an exposed plain, a grassland basin populated by megafauna and crossed by First Nations ancestral groups. As global ice sheets melted between 14,000 and 8,000 years ago, rising waters submerged the plain, creating a shallow ocean basin with volatile weather patterns and treacherous tidal currents. Today, that same submerged basin is being re-engineered as a high-capacity energy conduit. The Marinus Link involves running a 1,500 megawatt high-voltage direct current cable across 255 kilometres of seafloor, connecting northwest Tasmania's hydroelectric storage capacity directly into the Victorian grid. Marine geologists from Geoscience Australia and engineering survey crews have mapped the seabed in high resolution to locate safe trenching corridors through mobile sand waves and basaltic outcrops left behind by ancient volcanic activity. By linking Tasmania's deep hydro reserves with mainland wind and solar hubs, the project turns a drowned prehistoric landscape into an essential stabilisation mechanism for the national electricity market. Item 5. South Australia, the Lake Torrens and Gawler Craton deep critical minerals drilling. In South Australia, deep beneath the salt flats of the Gawler Craton, geologists are probing rock layers laid down over 1.5 billion years ago in search of copper, gold, and rare earth elements that show no surface expression whatsoever. Location: Olympic Dam and Lake Torrens Corridor, far north, South Australia. Capital expenditure: 12.5 billion Australian dollars. Combined regional expansion projects. Footprint: multiple deep drilling corridors penetrating up to 1,000 metres of sedimentary cover. Key entities: BHP, Geological Survey of South Australia, CSIRO. The Gawler Craton is one of the oldest, most stable pieces of continental crust on Earth. Around 1.59 billion years ago, during the Mesoproterozoic era, intense volcanic and hydrothermal events forced metal-rich fluids through fractures in the granite basement. Over the subsequent billion years, tectonic subsidence buried these ore bodies beneath hundreds of meters of completely barren sandstone and limestone cover. When early European surveyors walked across the red clays surrounding Lake Torrens, they saw only an arid, featureless plain. It was not until 1975, using theoretical gravity and magnetic anomaly models developed by WMC Resources, that geologists drilled through 350 meters of unmineralized cover at Olympic Dam and struck one of the largest iron oxide copper-gold deposits on the planet. Today, modern exploration across the region, including BHP's Oak Dam discovery, uses advanced seismic imaging provided by the Geological Survey of South Australia and CSIRO to pinpoint ore bodies up to 1,000 meters underground. Mining engineers are now designing underground block cave operations that operate entirely below the surface cover, bypassing the topsoil without leaving vast open pits. Item 4. Victoria, the Suburban Rail Loop East and Underground Tunnelling Network. In Victoria, the scale of urban earth-moving shifts to the dense clay and basalt formations underlying Melbourne's eastern suburbs. Location: Cheltenham to Box Hill, Melbourne, Victoria. Capital expenditure: 30 billion Australian dollars to 34.5 billion Australian dollars, SRL East. Footprint: 26 kilometres of twin underground tunnels and 6 deep underground stations. Key entities: Suburban Rail Loop Authority, Victoria State Government. Melbourne's eastern subsurface is dominated by the Silurian-aged Melbourne Formation, a complex bedrock layer of interbedded sandstone and siltstone overlaid in places by quaternary basalt flows. Excavating 26 kilometres of continuous twin tunnels through these mixed ground conditions requires tunnel boring machines custom-engineered to handle both soft clay and dense rock without triggering surface settlement. The Suburban Rail Loop East represents the largest single public works job in Victoria's history. Tunnel boring machines are carving out shafts up to 30 metres beneath established residential neighbourhoods, removing millions of tonnes of spoil while navigating existing underground utility corridors and groundwater aquifers. The aim is to decentralise Melbourne's rail network, moving away from the traditional hub-and-spoke model radiating from Flinders Street Station to create an orbital transit loop. Yet, as impressive as these southern engineering feats are, they raise a crucial question. What happens when a mega project of this scale collides directly with extreme weather, deep environmental isolation, and hard scientific limits? Moving into the top tier of our countdown, the nature of these engineering developments moves beyond conventional civil works and enters the realm of advanced processing, heavy extraction, and global trade corridors, where scientific detection methods redefine what the rock holds. Item 3. New South Wales, the Hunter Valley and Central Coast Energy Transition Hubs. In New South Wales, the focus centres on transforming the state's industrial core, the Hunter Valley and Lake Macquarie regions, from traditional coal export infrastructure into high-capacity clean energy and grid stabilisation complexes. Location: Eraring, Hunter Valley and Port of Newcastle, New South Wales. Capital expenditure: 8.5 billion Australian dollars. Combined regional transmission and battery storage investment. Footprint: conversion of former coal-fired station precincts into grid-scale battery systems. Key entities: EnergyCo, Origin Energy, Transmission NSW, Port of Newcastle. For over a century, the geological history of the Sydney Basin dictates the industrial geography of New South Wales. Permian-aged coal seams, laid down 250 million years ago in vast swamp forests, provided the energy foundation for the state's electricity grid and export terminals. The sheer concentration of coal-fired power stations along Lake Macquarie and the Hunter Valley created a localised transmission grid optimised for centralised thermal generation. The scientific and structural shift occurred when engineers mapped the existing grid capacity against modern battery technology. At the Eraring Power Station site, Origin Energy approved a 700 megawatt/2,800 megawatt-hour grid-scale battery system, one of the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. By utilising the existing high-voltage switchyards and transmission lines built for the legacy coal plant, project engineers bypassed the need for hundreds of kilometres of new transmission corridors. Geophysical site surveys using electrical impedance tomography and high-density seismic reflection mapped the subsurface clay and weathered sandstone beneath the old ash dams to ensure structural stability for thousands of lithium-ion container modules. Simultaneously, at the Port of Newcastle, deep-water channel bathymetry using multi-beam sonar allowed marine surveyors to map the riverbed to a resolution of 10 centimetres. This data enabled engineers to plan a 1.5 billion Australian dollar green hydrogen and clean energy export hub within the existing shipping corridor, effectively repurposing the world's largest coal export terminal for next-generation energy logistics. Item 2. Queensland, the Mount Isa Inlier and Northwest Minerals Province expansion. In Queensland, the investigation moves far inland to the Mount Isa Inlier, where some of the oldest ore-forming processes on Earth are being re-evaluated through airborne geophysics and deep core analysis. Location: Mount Isa, Cloncurry and Julia Creek, Northwest Queensland. Capital expenditure: 5.0 billion Australian dollars. Copperstring 2032 transmission line and regional mine developments. Footprint: 840-kilometre high-voltage electricity line and deep underground critical mineral extensions. Key entities: Powerlink Queensland, Geological Survey of Queensland, Glencore, Queensland Government. The Mount Isa inlier formed during the Paleoproterozoic era, approximately 1.8 to 1.5 billion years ago. Multiple tectonic collisions and volcanic episodes forced hydrothermal fluids through fault systems, depositing concentrated zinc, lead, silver, and copper within siltstone and shale sequences. The surface outcrops were discovered in 1923 by prospector John Campbell Miles, but for decades, mining was limited to visible, high-grade, shallow seams. What changed the understanding of the region was not surface prospecting, but regional airborne magnetics and gravity surveys conducted by the Geological Survey of Queensland and Geoscience Australia. By measuring subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic and gravitational fields from low-flying aircraft, geologists identified deeply buried structural extensions of the Mount Isa fault system beneath hundreds of meters of Mesozoic cover in the Carpentaria Basin. To unlock these deep reserves, Queensland is constructing Copperstring 2032, an 840-kilometre high-voltage transmission line stretching from Townsville to Mount Isa. This $5 billion Australian infrastructure corridor connects the isolated Northwest Minerals Province directly to the national electricity market. Geochemical sampling and zircon dating of drill cores, retrieved from depths exceeding 800 metres, confirm massive deposits of vanadium, copper, and cobalt near Julia Creek. This data transformed a regional mining precinct facing depletion into a primary source of critical metals for global supply chains. Yet as significant as these East Coast transformations are, they remain dwarfed by the sheer scale of the engineering shift occurring in Australia's largest state. What happens when an entire region's economic model is rewritten by a single massive project in Western Australia? At the apex of our nationwide survey stands Western Australia, a jurisdiction where the sheer physical scale of industrial development matches the vast geological age of the landscape itself. Item 1. Western Australia, the Pilbara banded iron formations and green steel processing hubs. In the Pilbara region of Western Australia, the largest megaproject on the continent is not merely extracting raw material, it is fundamental re-engineering of the global steel supply chain across an ancient Archean craton. Location: Dampier Peninsula and Hamersley Range, Pilbara, Western Australia. Capital expenditure, $70 billion Australian dollars, combined regional green hydrogen, iron ore processing, and port expansion developments. Footprint, over 100,000 square kilometres of active mining tenure, rail corridors, and coastal ports. Key entities, Fortescue, Rio Tinto, BHP, Geological Survey of Western Australia, Woodside Energy. The geological foundation of the Pilbara was laid down between 3.5 and 2.2 billion years ago. During the Paleoproterozoic era, photosynthetic cyanobacteria began releasing oxygen into Earth's oceans, triggering the Great Oxidation Event. Dissolved iron in the seawater oxidized and settled onto the ocean floor in alternating layers of silica and iron oxide, creating the famous banded iron formations of the Hamersley Group. These rock layers hold the richest high-grade hematite deposits on Earth, forming the bedrock of Australia's mineral wealth. For 6 decades, the industrial strategy was straightforward: blast the hematite, load it onto heavy-haul freight trains stretching 3 kilometers long, and ship raw ore to overseas smelters. That model is now undergoing a radical overhaul. At Cape Lambert and the Port of Dampier, infrastructure consortia are constructing massive green hydrogen facilities and direct reduced iron processing plants. Powered by gigawatt-scale solar and wind arrays across the desert interior, these facilities aim to strip oxygen from iron ore using green hydrogen rather than coking coal, producing low-carbon metallic iron on Australian soil. The environmental and economic consequences of this transition are immense. The capital required across the Pilbara's combined green iron and renewable energy pipeline is estimated at $70 billion Australian dollars over 2 decades. Of this, roughly $20 billion Australian dollars is committed to immediate processing plant construction and dedicated solar fields, while the remaining $50 billion Australian dollars represents long-term capital allocation subject to technological scaling and global carbon pricing. The challenge is not merely technical, it requires managing complex groundwater dynamics in hyperarid catchments, securing native title agreements with traditional owner groups such as the Yindjibarndi and Ngaluma peoples, and protecting ancient cultural heritage sites across the Hamersley Range. By shifting from raw extraction to zero-carbon processing, Western Australia is effectively turning 2.5 billion ocean deposits into the foundation for a global green industrial economy. Yet behind these 8 massive construction sites across every state and territory lies a broader, national-scale question that connects them all. What does this rapid, silent transformation of the Australian landscape mean for the future of the continent? What kept these vast transformations unnoticed for so long was not secrecy, but a simple failure of spatial scale. Australians grew accustomed to looking at national infrastructure through the narrow lens of state borders, cadastral boundaries, and published municipal roadmaps, rather than the contiguous geological formations that dictate modern resource and energy corridors. We treat the surface map as a complete document, drawn once and finalized during the survey booms of the 20th century. But the geology beneath it remains dynamic, continuously reread as analytical instruments improve and economic imperatives shift. Much of this landscape remains unresolved. Geologists at Geoscience Australia estimate that over 80% of the Australian continent's basement rock remains buried beneath deeply weathered regolith and sedimentary cover, its precise mineral composition and structural anomalies still unmapped by high-resolution seismic or gravity survey lines. In the deep offshore basins of the exclusive economic zone, bathymetric coverage remains equally sparse, leaving major underwater features unexamined even as subsea cable routes and offshore wind arrays are planned across them. The official map looks finished, printed in sharp lines on heavy paper. The ground beneath it is not. Which project across your state or territory surprised you most? Or is there an overlooked infrastructure build in your local area that seems out of proportion to its surroundings? Let us know in the comments below, and consider subscribing to stay updated on our deep investigations into the hidden geography of the continent.